Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Abigail Maines. I am the Chief Revenue Officer at HiddenLayer. Thank you for making time for us today. Before we jump into today's presentation and our panelists, I wanted to talk a little bit about HiddenLayer. For those of you who are new, and maybe this is your first webinar with us, HiddenLayer is a security for AI platform company. We are very innovative in that we protect models both pre and post production, as well as predictive models and generative models. We're very excited to announce that we released our automated red teaming tool for generative AI approximately 2 weeks ago now. I wanted to take that opportunity of the launch to sort of follow up with our subject matter experts today to talk about what is becoming quickly a board level discussion. That specifically being, how are we ensuring that the models that we're putting into production, specifically LLMs, are secure and are not vulnerable to things like brand damage, also any sort of adversarial attack. As many of you know, MITRE Atlas and the OWASP Top 10 for LLMs has provided us a framework to identify the types of attacks that we protect against. And today what we'll be talking about is both the manual and automated way to, in advance, determine if any of your AI assets are at all vulnerable. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. First, I'll start with you, Malcolm. Do you mind giving us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, not a problem. Thanks, Ab. Malcolm Harkins, I'm Chief Security and Trust Officer at HiddenLayer, so I'm responsible for shepherding our internal controls of our systems and protection of our products and stuff for our customers. I've been in the cybersecurity industry doing that for cybersecurity companies for almost 10 years. Had the same position at Silence, and then previous to that, my life was pretty simple. I was at Intel for a few decades and was Chief Security and Privacy Officer.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here today. Over to you, Jason.
Yeah, I'm Jason Martin. I'm a principal AI security researcher at HiddenLayer. My job is to figure out what's next. So really determine where the threat landscape is going specific to AI, and understanding that. I've been working in AI security for about 8 years now, which is pretty long in a sort of a new emerging field like this. I also spent a good chunk of my career at Intel. It's a theme here in this particular webinar. Um, yeah, look forward to talking about these new capabilities.
Awesome. Thank you. Over to you, Haley.
Hi, I'm Haley Buckingham. I'm the VP of Engineering here at HiddenLayer. I'm responsible for our engineering teams that actually build the products that we are shipping out to the world. My background in engineering actually started in data science and machine learning engineering. I've been doing that about 10 years. And before that, in grad school, was applying machine learning even to things like wildfire policy. So I've kind of run the gamut of applications for ML and now AI, and leading that charge here in Layer in the engineering perspective.
Awesome. All right, well, let's get right into it. So Malcolm, from your perspective as a practitioner of many decades, why is red teaming important in general? And then maybe any nuance that you can think of when we're talking about red teaming AI assets in particular.
Yeah, well, red teaming for me has always been a cornerstone of things that we've done over the past. You get a group of folks, they pretend to be the enemy. It's a much more holistic approach to check the systems and provide a more complete validation around the effectiveness of controls. Which again, a lot of people do audits and they do all these other checking, and I would. For those that aren't fully familiar, I look at audits, they're necessary and they're needed, but they're testing to make sure that a control exists. It doesn't, in some cases, give you validation that the control is effective in managing and mitigating the risks that you need to be responsible for. So they complement each other. But for me, that red teaming aspect of getting, the people involved and having an enemy's perspective around attacking a system and finding the weaknesses so that you mitigate it is paramount to really that assurance that you need.
Awesome. And, I know you do a ton of work sort of reviewing the regulatory environment globally as it relates to AI and sort of AI adoption and what the regulatory agencies are concerned about. There's obviously a lot of red teaming or proof that you have done some penetration testing on your models, and a lot of the rules, including the executive order from, I guess, just over a year ago in the White House. What would you say to the audience today as to how to correlate sort of those regulations? Do we see them accelerating? Do we think that we need, is AI red teaming mandatory today from your interpretation? What would your advice be there?
Yeah, well, again, most of the regulatory side of it, both I think for what we've done in the United States at this point with the executive order, and then more specifically the EU AI Act and even Colorado's, in essence, carbon copy of the EU AI Act for Colorado and what's being proposed in California, New York, and stuff like that. One of the core aspects of all that is safety and protection of people, not only their privacy and all these other aspects, including bias and all that, is a level of validation that the models, are not susceptible to tampering or manipulation or attacks that would harm Malcolm as an individual or a group of people or society more broadly. But it really has much more of a focus on protecting the safety and aspects of Malcolm's privacy versus, let's say, a fraud model that might just be mitigating financial loss. So most of those regulations are more on that privacy side of things, but they do require that red teaming and that validation that Malcolm cannot be harmed.
Yeah, it really explains why it's becoming such a board level topic. Yeah, I'm literally at a conference here in Las Vegas and left a meeting where GSI, a large partner of ours, mentioned the fact that he had been involved in sort of 3 board preparations over the last 2 quarters, specifically around red teaming of AI assets. So maybe over to you, Jason, before we get too far into this conversation around just the definition of red teaming. How should our audience be thinking about it pragmatically today, such that the rest of the conversation we can land it for them?
Yeah, and I think Malcolm covers some of this already, but really, red teaming is about bringing in a set of security experts into the sort of environment that you want to validate. And you're really going in to test the efficacy of the controls that you have in place. So you've set out a set of objectives for what you want to protect. They may come from regulatory or they may come from business sort of necessity. And then you set up typically a set of defensive controls to, instantiate those objectives that you have. Really, the red teaming is coming in and saying, all right, well, we're going to do our best to be the bad guys and be polite about it. And we'll come in and see if those controls actually work. Do they actually prevent information leakage or privacy failures? Do they prevent business logic from being tampered with? Do they prevent your sensitive intellectual property or your business plans or whatever your particular application has access to from being stolen or leaked out or publicly disclosed? So really it comes down to the mechanisms to test those.
Awesome. As one of the nice bad guys from time to time, yourself personally, maybe just share a little bit without naming names or anything like that. Share a little bit about some of our professional service-led engagements for generative model testing and sort of maybe give some examples of some of the success criteria or some of the vulnerabilities you were testing for and sort of how our customers sort of worked with you to collaborate on getting the outcomes that they wanted.
Yeah, so if you look at well, first, just thinking about what are customers actually deploying in terms of generative AI applications, and they range from sort of internal kind of business support functionality to outward sort of public facing interfaces that customers of theirs or even the public internet can interact with, and they kind of have different sets of objectives and different sort of data that they're hooked up to. If you take a recent engagement as an example, you look kind of at if you look at generative AI as kind of a new user interface to existing documentation, you'll see a lot of cases of you've got a whole bunch of support documentation for your products or something like that, and you use LM to be a new interface to that. So customers can go chat with your documentation. They can ask questions about your products. They can, look for recommendations, service support, that kind of thing. But what you don't really want in a scenario like that is for someone to go and mess with your chatbot and convince it that your product should be sold for super cheap, or recommend your competitor or, say something very negative about your products. You want it to stay neutral to positive, those kinds of things. And so it's important in a red team engagement to kind of lay out those set of, business objectives, and translate them into the security that you might need on the application.
Absolutely. And what do you think in terms of the delineation between some automated tooling that we use, inclusive of our product, versus manual? Like, what is the percentage that you see in our engagements today leveraging automated tooling versus just smart bad guys?
Yeah. I think, if you look at the two kind of spaces, the automated tooling is a good way to get started. You look at like, all right, what are the common sort of attack vectors? How might those instantiate in this particular application? Is it, sort of trivially vulnerable to any of these sorts of things? And then when you get in the existing sort of tooling that's out there, you typically don't see a lot of ways to adapt to the application specific sort of objectives as well as its logic. What does, going back to my example, if you're trying to get it to talk about a competitor, well, the automated tooling doesn't even know what industry you're in. It doesn't know, what who your competitors are. And so that's where, human pen testing typically comes in at that point and says, all right, I really know what bad looks like to you and your application.
So related to that, we did announce this tool, automated red teaming for AI is the formal name. And so what kind of workloads would you be suggesting the folks on this call today think about that tool for? What kind of workload can we take off of the existing human resources, either internally or through external sources for our customers?
Yeah, it's great. I was just talking about some of the existing tooling, and I think really the way to view it is it's a tool to really enable customers to evaluate their AI systems with repeatable testing at scale, right?
Yeah.
And so I always think about like in a manual red team engagement, you really shouldn't do the same attack twice. Right, you really should be pulling that kind of knowledge into tooling that can then make it repeatable, testable across many different things. And so that's kind of the approach that we're looking at here. But when you look at a large company, they're trying to deploy hundreds, maybe thousands of new applications. Each of those has their own kind of business objectives and things. You just don't have enough people to go and manually test all of them to efficacy. So really you're looking at scaling across there, as well as leveraging a lot of the attacks they have common techniques that apply across the applications. So you want that set of things to just be automatically tested, evaluated, reported on. You can do it during upgrades. You can do it at some sort of cadence, all of those sorts of things. You can meet your compliance reporting requirements, all of that.
Is it safe to say, automated testing is very appropriate to at least knock out automated attack tooling and automated attacks, so we can kind of pre-screen for some of those things in the wild?
Yeah. I mean, you see, if you look at the way we've constructed the automated red teaming for AI, it has kind of a set of configurable tests that we developed in our research team, but that we really pulled them in from a set of different, I guess, places that we monitor. They're from some of our red team engagements, like I mentioned. They are monitoring security research and academic literature that's out there in the public space. They're coming from Capture the Flag events that are held at various security conferences. And then, of course, our own internal kind of exploratory research. So really trying to pull that in and whenever possible, identify a way to generalize the techniques so that they would work across sort of horizontally broad across the set of applications you may be looking to deploy. Now, that's not going to get you the depth of coverage that you would get from a human red team.
Understood. I think it's a great point. I think I would be remiss as the CRO not to mention that alignment is very similar to the rest of our platform, meaning this concept of all of the research and all the investment that we've made in sort of novel research is going to infuse it does infuse our automated red teaming tool, just like it infuses our model scanner and just like it infuses our AI detection and response, and frankly, as significant differentiation. So I'll come back to you, Jason, in a minute for futures, but now I'm going to go over to Haley. Haley and I are very fortunate to be able to collaborate on some work with the Department of Defense that's been publicly announced. And in those scenarios, we're working with predictive models, and we're red teaming some predictive models. Haley, can you just sort of share with us sort of the predictive world, give some use cases and some of the things that we're learning from those engagements?
Yeah, absolutely. So up till now, we've been talking largely in the generative space, human language, human audio, video, things like this, and models that can respond. But the world of machine learning is a lot bigger than that, of course. In the sense of generative versus predictive. Predictive here, we're talking about all of the classical ML cases where machine algorithms learn to make decisions and is doing so in practice, right? So the DoD is a very good example of somewhere that has a very high cost of failure, whether you're using machine learning or AI or not. And so within their machine learning applications, their AI applications, that cost of failure is usually something like human life, health, critical values, critical systems, things like this. And so those ML systems can range all over the map. Consider radar guidance for, are you going to collide instead of dock properly? Is your GPS being spoofed by an adversary and you're not actually where you think you are? Is what's in this image what we believe to be in this image, or is there something else in this image? There's all kinds of applications, in some ways very similar to the machine learning that's used everywhere else in kind of the tech industry. But again, the cost of failure is high. So for those systems, just like Jason's talking about adversarial techniques against generative models, there are adversarial techniques against these predictive models. They tend to be algorithmic. There's an algorithm that's walking through mathematics to try to find some kind of input that will make the models, the ML models that are part of these systems, make a different choice than what they're supposed to do. Maybe that's so that you don't slow down on a docking procedure. Maybe that's that you misclassify something in an image and make a really bad choice. And so for, again, DoD in particular, and anywhere health and human safety is involved, and where there's an adversary, where there's theoretically somebody else out there, not just a machine, right, but a person, a group that has vested interest in you making some kind of mistake or your system's making a mistake, it creates a pretty high risk situation. So what we've been working on with them is saying like, well, you can't necessarily expect to get lots of warning that somebody's going to maybe broadcast a signal that might confuse your particular radar model or change something in an image that would then lead something astray. Your adversaries have their own machine learning models they can test against. And so, you're talking about maybe one-shot detection. You get one shot to notice something was an adversary, and that's very difficult. So instead, we're looking at something essentially pre-hardening a model. How would you pre-harden a model so that it is aware of the kinds of adversarial techniques from the get-go? And this comes right back to red teaming. And so the set of research that we've been building with them is looking at how do you run these algorithms in a standard way, just like Jason was talking for generative AI, the typical ways that you might attack an image model or radar model or any kinds of model to come up with inputs that would confuse the model, lead it to make a wrong decision, and provide that information back to the model creators, the people who are in these research labs creating the next generation of things, so that you can have more confidence that when you encounter those kinds of adversarial inputs in the real world, that your models won't always be or ever be, hopefully ever be, kind of misled and cause whatever problem those models are designed to avoid.
Excellent. And and similar to what Jason was alluding to, we do use both automated techniques as well as human-based techniques, right? Is there, in your opinion, more need for human-based approaches and predictive versus generative, or how should we be thinking about the difference?
Yeah, great question. It's going to be some of both. Machine learning applications outside of the generative are many. There's so many applications, so many types of data that are looked at, so many decisions that are made. To some degree, any off the shelf, as it were, attack algorithm tool set is only going to scratch the surface. And then you get into really interesting questions of what constitutes a confusion, right? If I beam all kinds of radar spaghetti all over the radar sphere and that causes a model to make a different decision because it's being jammed, that's maybe not as interesting as a very subtle, carefully crafted thing that causes alarm. And so, but that what you care about is going to be different each time. So that's where the human kind of application comes in as well, using these tools to kind of outline what kinds of things confuse these models. Of those things, which ones do we care about? Which ones get by? Of those, which ones are realistic in the real world that we have a use case for and want to protect? And then, of course, you may not have a model that conforms nicely to the tools available to you, in which case the manual intervention. I know some of our professional services have done that kind of thing with customers as well, where they had a predictive model. There's no tooling that connects to it, but the mathematics still work. You just have to write code and do that kind of thing too. So it gets high touch, but.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Thank you. Jason, back to you for just a second. As we look forward, I don't know what the future of Gen AI is defined as. Is that like next week, next month? I don't know. Like it seems to be every day is a new day. But like if you look in the crystal ball and you're thinking about here's the evolution of our automated red teaming. It's obviously a product is obviously related to the evolution of the space. What are you sort of thinking about, or maybe some of your team is researching right now?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely, next week and maybe a month out. But I think, the application space is really evolving almost faster than the models themselves right now in the generative space. There was this huge burst in capability that happened over the last couple of years, just in the text generation and multimodal space for models. And now I think now we're seeing more work in what to use them for, like what kinds of applications truly bring value to AI, rather than just the straight like knowledge-based chatbot. And so there's a few things that we're looking at that seem to be evolving. There's semi-mature sort of capabilities like the retrieval augmentation generation type, or RAG is often called, type of use cases like the customer service chatbot I mentioned earlier. But there's more and more capabilities that you can connect to these bots. Often they enable you to pull in information from news sources. It could be from SQL, they could be pulled from web search. Like you can really start to incorporate current knowledge into the system versus the knowledge that the model memorized when it was trained a year ago or whenever. And then you have this sort of functions that allows the model to decide to use programmatic access to other application functionality. This could take the form of, something simple like, a query to see what the current weather is, right? That's sort of a very trivial example to incorporate into a response. Or it could be, a deep call into your CRM or some sort of business logic that really gives you this natural interface through text and audio that's coming very soon. But those also involve connecting you really to very sensitive sort of internal functionality. And it's a little bit of they will build it, so then we'll be sort of doing the retroactive like, okay, well, what exposure did that create? And I think we're doing a lot of work both in the manual research space, but also in the automated red teaming to determine how you automatically discover that, and then how you discover the risk that it may expose. What should you do if you discover an application that's making maybe function calls that are risky? So we're looking a lot at that. And then the follow-on to that, which is some of the coolest stuff you'll see, but is also some of the scariest stuff you'll see, is really truly agentic systems. So there's a lot of talk about agents. Agents mean a lot of different things, but the one that's probably the definition that I think is most interesting is a model that can choose autonomously to take action on your behalf. So you give it a very simple prompt like, set up my computer to install this software, right? That's sort of a great use case that can be somewhat complicated sometimes. And the agent can do something as sophisticated as go to that application's website, read its documentation, learn how to install it, download the installer, and run it. Like that type of use case is very, very cool for consumers. There's similar applications in the enterprise space, but that's a lot of exposure. That's a lot of risk. And really we're trying to understand how you would deal with these agentic systems and how you might determine what risks they create upfront.
Awesome. As you were talking about the discoverability and sort of the deep reaching into various tools, how should we be thinking about sort of all these SaaS providers that we have embedded in our IT stack and how they've all dropped a bunch of AI into various parts of their product? I know that and Malcolm can speak to this, there's contractual things that say, you can't have my data, you can't do this, you got to do this. How should we be thinking about red teaming that? Do we ask the manufacturers to prove that they've red teamed? Do customers, are they responsible for this red team? Do they even have the right access? And I might be putting you on the spot on this one. And then it's to everybody on the call. I just think it's a real concern of enterprise customers. How do I know what I don't know? And if I definitely don't know, then how am I supposed to control it? Or how am I supposed to red team it? Do you have any reaction to that?
Yeah, it's a real concern. I think, there's always a push and pull between the providers and the security industry about access. And to good reason. Sometimes security gets too much access and that becomes its own security issue. But I think if you look at the SaaS providers who are rushing, there's an arms race here between the SaaS providers, that their competitive pressure to bring AI into new and novel use cases across their platforms. And there's really interesting applications to that. But in some cases, they really expose the data in that SaaS platform to a new attack surface is really the way to think about it. Some of these, I'll give you a concrete example. Thinking about how you might prompt engineer a model that is providing access to a data platform. So you can now chat with your documents. That's a really cool use case. But if that model can also consume those documents and take the contents and embed them in a URL that the user clicks on, you've just exfiltrated all of those contents out into the wild. Like that prompt could be engineered to an attacker controlled URL endpoint, and you've just absorbed all that data. So I think it's very important to think about those risks. And part of what we do in our red teaming, both the manual and the automated red teaming, is try to evoke those kind of exfiltration URLs in the model as we're testing it, just as one sort of concrete example. Oh, and regarding access, yeah, I think observability, you get a lot of the SaaS providers who, really the interactions between your data and your applications and their model are all, I don't want to say hidden, but they're contained behind the wall of the SaaS provider. And so that visibility is a little bit more limited there.
Really. Malcolm, what are you thinking, if you were on the other side of the screen, what are some of the next steps or and by the way, everybody, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I should have said that about 30 minutes ago, but we're taking questions from the chat as well. Malcolm, what would you say, like the first, I don't know, 3 to 5 steps that people should be thinking about red teaming their AI assets if they haven't contemplated it or started that process yet?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, it's pick an AI model that you've got under development or in use, right? So figure out where you're getting value from the use of AI. Where there's value, if it's compromised in some way, there's risk. So I would chase the value side of it first, prioritize where you're getting the maximum value, because that's where you're going to have the maximum impact if it's compromised. And then the question, I think, gets back to the dialogue we were having. Do you do it manually? Do you do it automated? If you do it automated, again, we've talked about making your security resources more efficient and effective, but there may also be skill gaps you have in your security team. They might not know how to do red teaming of machine learning, right? In which case, getting automation will help. You might also be able to use that automation and say, well, let's have the data science and the people creating and developing the ML models be the ones doing the automated testing. So that way I can use my humans on the security side for some of the more sophisticated things. So I think for me, it becomes more of a, put on my old finance hat. How do I get the maximum coverage at the minimum total cost that allows me to feel comfort and assurance that my models are protected in the way in which I expect them to do if I'm using it internally? Or getting back to the discussion we were just having on the third party, if I'm a creator of AI or I'm using directly or indirectly exposing my AI to consumers or other businesses, I have a responsibility for that assurance. And as you know, when we launched the Security for AI Council back a while ago, we had this dialogue. We've created a set of questions around third-party risks. And in some of those things, just like in traditional SaaS or other things, we got one the other day. Somebody asked for our pen test report. Well, we gave them the tear sheet, right? It's the same thing. Ask, what's the red teaming and penetration test results for the model you've embedded in a solution that you're selling to me? And how many criticals, how many highs, when did you remediate them? Same thing we've done in traditional third-party risk. We should ask that as a part of our validation of the AI that's coming to us from solution providers. And those solution providers could be typical IT organizations, or frankly, your law firm and your accounting firm. Because guess what? Your other service providers, including law firms, financial accounting firms, they're using AI as a part of the work they're doing for you. So you also need to increase the scope of what you're doing and ask them where they're using models and how they've validated that those models are adequately protected and are not going to expose you to risk.
Great. Yeah, I think you make a great point. It's very similar to what we've seen in the past and how we are already sort of penetration test other parts of the stack. We do have a number of questions. So I'm going to choose the questions randomly here. I think they'll come up on the screen, and then they're eligible for any of you that are on the call to answer. So I think I'll start with this first one. Do you mean AI breach and attack simulation or emulation, or AI automated AI pen testing? So I think just some clarification maybe over to you, Jason, that might have been related to when you were speaking.
All right, I'm having trouble reading can you say the question again for me?
Absolutely. I think just clarification on when we're talking about our productized solution for automated red teaming of AI, do we mean AI breach and attack simulation or emulation, or AI pen testing, or both?
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately the goal is validation of the controls, right? And so, whether that's emulated or, a pen test it involves, going deeper potentially. It's actually maybe a deeper sort of aspect of this question is when you're doing a red team engagement, you always have this question about how deep you go. For example, a very valid question is should the red team engagement be destructive in any fashion? That's very informative, but also very devastating if it's, say, on a production system that you may not want. So we try to keep that separate. We want to make sure that if you're maybe testing a pre-release sort of application that's in a sandbox or some sort of qualification environment, go ahead, go deep, try to potentially destroy it. That's very informative before you launch it. If you're doing regular testing against a production application that is as use, no, you probably don't want to do that. I hope I addressed that question. Maybe
Jason,
others have
the
other
one thing I
thoughts.
would add, because again, I think people could get confused, we're not emulating your environment to do the red teaming. We are red teaming the environment you point us at, which could be a pre-production environment or a production environment. And to your point, if you do it in a production environment, you always run some risks when you're tinkering with things. And so again, that becomes a risk choice as to whether you've got the right path to production, but it is almost a your production environment really to do that red teaming in for the confidence that your systems are protected once they go live.
Excellent. Thank you both. I'm going to move on to another question. Maybe this would be a good one for you, Haley. I have to choose these questions. There's a number of questions here. One second. Okay. So this question says, you have trained a number of organizations, teams on red teaming up AI. In your opinion, what would the ramp time be for people, existing pen testing red teamers, to be trained to add AI assets to their scope?
Yeah, good question. This has evolved a lot over the last months and year, just like any kind of red teaming on any kind of system. Once there's tools available, the training times come down. So right now available are tools that can do red teaming against generative AI systems. And so the onboarding time is probably in the months, right? To learn the tools, learn how to use, what are the nuances, what do you look for next? But there's tools available to get yourself started. You don't have to learn the entire, security stack of generative AI from scratch to go. That's not the case with predictive ML stuff. There are very few, or if any, publicly available tools that do much use against the wide world of predictive, classical ML. And so in that case, you're looking at a much longer onboarding time if you're going to train up internally people to start red teaming and testing all of the different ways you want to security test traditional predictive ML, much longer at present. Although that could change as the tools out there advance.
Awesome. Thank you, Haley. Mohammed has another question here that I think we should definitely cover because it's sort of foundational to the product. What is the benchmark that we're using for automated red teaming? So Jason, maybe over to you. You spent a lot of time sort of mapping our product to both MITRE as well as OWASP.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. And they actually have different views. Like, so if you look at MITRE, Atlas, which is the framework specific built on MITRE ATT&CK for AI systems, it's very comprehensive, and it kind of comes at it from almost a networking kind of viewpoint and a total sort of viewpoint. If you look at OWASP, it's a very application sort of oriented view. They're both useful, right? They're depending on what sort of target you're looking at. For this first release of the automated red teaming for AI tool, we focused mostly on filling in the categories in the OWASP top 10. We're covering 6 of them right now, specifically the prompt injection, insecure output handling, denial of service, sensitive information disclosure, excessive agency, and over-reliance. Those 6 categories. And those are the ones that we thought, they applied most. It was sort of a combination. They applied most applications. Most applications are concerned about those 6 categories. They also align with the kind of runtime testing element of the automated red teaming tooling. Some of the other OWASP categories are more upstream of the application, so there'd be something you'd be looking for using other techniques. I think, as we go forward, we'll do more mapping into the MITRE Atlas framework. There's definitely overlaps. They cover it. There's also a new version of the OWASP top 10, so we'll be looking at adapting the categories to cover that going forward.
Yeah, I think it's important to know we're very active with Jason, Malcolm, and Haley are all very active with MITRE and with OWASP, and we'll continue to sort of be active. I think we want to ensure that those frameworks are inclusive of all the things and all the attacks that we are seeing in the wild, whether we're talking about sort of our automated red teaming tool here or sort of on the AI detection and response product. Charlie has a question here, just some product questions. Is your red teaming product on-prem or SaaS? Can I integrate it into my CI/CD pipeline? And do you have a list of categories? I think Jason just covered off the categories. I don't know, Jason, if you want to answer those, or I can answer some of those technical ones in terms of deployment.
Yeah, it's a combination. So if you look at typically when you're doing one of these tests, you need integration into the environment of the customer, and so there is an on-premise sort of runner agent that can be used to test internal systems or integrate into CI/CD. And then, for reporting purposes, we wanted to make sure that you could integrate this red teaming sort of information together with your overall dashboard for AI security. And so that is all part of the platform that we have so you can kind of have your red team and your blue team sort of together in one sort of pane of glass. Others are welcome to add to that.
Yeah, and I think we'll see this evolve too. There's a lot of different form factors a product like this can do. So that's an ongoing discussion as well of where to fit it in. Is there applications where people really want a fully SaaS hosted versus fully on-prem? More will come.
And I would add that's again I really want to make sure everybody appreciates the platform approach HiddenLayer takes to security for AI. So on our traditional, our older products, let's call them, which are again our model scanning solution and our AI detection and response products, both for generative and predictive models. Those products are deployable completely on-prem, completely SaaS or hybrid. What we're articulating here is that this version of the automated red teaming product is hybrid by nature, meaning that we had the local presence as well as the access to run it from a UI. Excellent questions. Here's another question from Anonymous. Is it true that the larger the model, the larger the attack surface? Larger, I guess, would be, I don't know if it's just size of the model, number of inputs of the model, I'll let you guys.
This one's fun. Yeah. I'll take a crack, but I'm curious, Jason, if you have a hot take that differs from mine. This one's complicated. Larger, I'm going to take larger in terms of like the total size of the bits and bytes that the model is actually using to make its decisions. Some of the really large models are kind of hard to confuse. When we're talking about generative models, they are by nature a little harder to get off. Their guardrails are firmer. And so in that case, like the attack surface is maybe a bigger in some sense because the model can talk to you about a lot more things. It has a lot more capability, but it might actually be harder to get it to go off rails. So I don't think that relationship holds exactly the way you'd think of it with like a standard neural net where, the larger the matrix underlying the neural net, the more ways you could find, more mathematical combinations there are to lead it into strange decision boundary area or something like that. But yeah, I'm not going to stand too much on that hill because I'm sure there's lots of opinions out there.
Yeah, well, Haley, to add to your thing, there's also a difference between attack surface and attack depth.
Yeah.
And so you have to think about both. And then the other thing that a lot of people confuse is a bigger model might actually have less impact than a smaller model, depending upon the context of what the model is doing and the blast radius of damage that could occur. And so, that's where I think you go surface, depth, and then scope of impact is really what you need to consider when you're thinking about these things. And again, that's the purpose of red teaming. Have a holistic approach versus something that is much more specific.
Yeah, I'll add to maybe to go back to the more traditional answer, but really riffing on what you were just saying here, Malcolm, is a much bigger model might be chosen because it's more capable. What's really maybe your value judgment there is it's more capable because I want it to do more things. And so it's not necessarily that the model's bigger, but you want it to have more access, want to have more power, and therefore then yes, of course, the surface is going to higher. It's just what you're saying, right? Like what are you attaching that model to? What is its blast radius around it? Has a lot to do with what you're using it for. So
Excellent. Thank you very much. We have another question here. Oh, that one we already did. Sorry, number 12. Back to the product side, upon scanning red teaming completion, is there prescriptive guidance provided on how to optimally configure defensive posture? Over to you, Jason.
Yeah, I think for this initial release, that's still a work in progress in terms of how to effectively configure it. I think this is more about discoverability at this point with the initial release, but certainly, that's something we're working on. I think just filling in and providing more guidance. Part of it comes down to the application again. I think a lot of teams are well versed in controls that they may need to apply in certain circumstances. So we'll fill in the gaps where there's AI specific controls that need to be brought to bear. But if your model's hooked up to a SQL database and it's vulnerable to SQL injection, then you should apply SQL injection controls. Like that's what you should do. But yeah, I think that's something that's coming soon.
Another question, what skills should I look for in my internal teams to help with defending AI? And I think we get this question quite a bit from customers. They are looking for sort of what is the level of domain expertise one must have. Are we talking about data scientists here? Are we talking about MLEs? Are we talking about security teams that we can train up? So any reaction to that question? Anyone?
Yeah, well, I'll start with Ab, and I'll go back to something that I published just a few weeks ago. Your traditional controls and all your defense in depth and all those processes that exist do not protect AI models, right? So one, you need to recognize that. So I'm glad somebody's also recognizing that they might have a skill deficiency with their teams because they also have a control deficiency with their existing controls protecting AI models. And I think you need to look at both aspects of that. And even for myself, having been around this for a long time, I've been drinking through a fire hose since I landed at HiddenLayer because the tech stack is different, the models are different, the file types are different. And so I think you have to go through that educational process, and I think some aspects of this, and we've mentioned OWASP, we've mentioned the MITRE Atlas, the tooling that we're providing, but it's going to be an education for some that you're going to need to help them through, so that there's skill sets of understanding how the models work, how they could be tampered with, and the impact and blast radius that can occur. You're just going to have to go through that journey. And it's frankly not going to stop because it's evolving very fast.
So I'll just add to that. I think from a skill perspective, I don't know if you'd call this a skill or not, but I think it's really important for you to look for folks on your team who recognize and don't get distracted by models that appear to be human-like. And what I mean by that is particularly with the generative models, you can get sort of pulled down the rabbit hole of sort of the Turing test. Like, okay, this is acting, it's giving me responses that look and act very human-like, and you can miss the fact that they go bizarrely off the rails when given certain sort of non-standard inputs. And so the skill that I think is most important in it, you can use this with a traditional red teamer. Like, you don't need a mathematical background in deep dive into backpropagation techniques or anything crazy like that. You just need to recognize when the models look like they're providing human-like responses, but may be susceptible to something very non-human.
Sure. Excellent. I love this question. I could have written it myself. Lucky number 13. Along the lines of optimally configuring defenses, how does the product tie into our generative product for runtime? So that's what we call AI detection and response for generative AI. And obviously they're very complementary. And I did not write that question. That actually came in case anybody's wondering if I seeded that. I mean, we have this happening all the time with our customers in terms of we're either using the automated tooling or using some professional services to do red teaming. We identified the vulnerabilities by the OWASP, like Jason just mentioned, and then our AI detection and response product provides protection against those same OWASP categories. So it would definitely be a suggested recommendation and mitigation step out of a report from a red team assessment. What else would you guys add there in terms of, and they're coming from the same platform. So from an ease of use, ease of deployment, ease of familiarity, ongoing automated red teaming, ongoing runtime protection, they're all very complementary. But Jason, what would you add?
I mean, I think, the same sources of information that, fed into our development of the automated red team are certainly informing the AIDR platform. So the first thing I'd point out is just that, these are the attack techniques that we're intrinsically trying to defend. Yeah. Using the product space. But I think, if you look at it from a user experience perspective, being able to identify a model in the pane of glass and see the report findings from running automated red teaming against it, and then pivot over and say, and then during deployment, here are the detections that have come through. They're all coming together using the same sort of taxonomy and nomenclature. That's kind of what I would say is trying to make the defender's job easier.
Yeah, I'll riff on that just a little if I may. I know that the current product is for generative, the red teaming product, and some of the work I was talking about with the DoD is on the predictive side, but the same principle is true. The reason we're doing this internally is because we're very, very interested in defense. And so we are constantly attacking our own stuff. And so our defenses are based on our own skill in red teaming as well. And so it is very, very intrinsically tied, just right down to the beginning of our research. So
awesome. I don't know if I can think of a better question to end on than sort of like the whole complete circle of the security for AI platform. So I think I'll just end this by saying I see there's a number of questions around getting demos. You can easily get a demo of the automated red teaming for AI tool on our website. You can see there is a link for a demo request. You can also use the contact us. There's a ton of information on our website. Please feel free to use that. I'll make sure that gets to the right person so you can get a demo. And we just want to thank you so much for your time today. If there's any questions that we didn't answer specifically, you can use that contact us and share them, and we'll get back to you right away. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, panelists.
Thank you.
Bye.